I'm Damaris Athene. I'm a transdisciplinary artist working across and between lots of different mediums, including like painting, sculpture, photography. In my practice, I'm really interested in the post-human and also how digital technology affects our perception of bodily materiality. So I guess I was always very creative as a child. I was always making things, but I never really thought of it as something to pursue. And it was maybe GCSE time when I was like, wait a second, art is the thing I like doing. I only really like biology because I get to draw diagrams. Maybe I should actually do the thing that I like. So then, I just got more and more into it, and then took it for A-level, and then went on to do a foundation. And then after a year out, then I went to Camberwell to do my undergraduate. And I actually started on photography, and I was really unsatisfied by the lack of physical connection that I had with the art that I was making. And I was doing a lot of darkroom processes just to try and get something tangible. But then I changed over to the painting course after the first term. That was way better. It was only much later really that I got more interested in doing sculptural things. I think I've just been over the years becoming more and more drawn to the 3 dimensions. I was kind of playing around with different materials. I was looking at digital printing onto fabric. So I was taking very close-up pictures of very impasto paintings that I made, then printing that and then making these sort of padded sculptural paintings with this printed fabric. And then I discovered this material called polyspandex neoprene. So you might have come across neoprene in a wetsuit, but this is a bit different. It's a more stretchy version of it, basically. And it has this very strange skin-like quality, and it looks so kind of machine-made and manufactured. And it has this body, but it's also stretchy. And I tried airbrushing on it. I was like, oh wow, this is really doing something, because of the weave of the fabric and the dots of the airbrush. It basically melts into it in a way that you really wouldn't have that effect on canvas or on a piece of paper where you can really see the dots of the airbrush. It almost makes it look like the fabric's been printed or something. And then I was developing these padded sculptural paintings still, thinking about this kind of softness and the bodily, but accessing that in a very abstract way. And it was actually after applying for masters and getting interviews but then not getting places that I really reassessed my whole practice, and that really made this move into something different, because at that time I was working with painting. I'd been doing these very soft blended works that were thinking about the internal body, so a lot of medical imagery, and I did a series on bruises as well, kind of thinking about this barrier of the skin and how it kind of hints at what's lying underneath, but that's not the whole story. And then it's beautiful, but obviously made through pain. Then that kind of reassessing of my practice, and I was constantly making these very abstract blobby shapes, and I just kept on drawing them, and then that turned into paintings. It still wasn't quite getting there, but then when I discovered the sort of airbrushing plus neoprene equation, and then I applied that to these blobby shapes in these sculptural padded paintings, then it was okay, now this is actually getting somewhere. I think quite a lot of the time in my BA I was overthinking things, and I would think so much about something but not actually do anything, that you'd think past the idea and then go off it and then not actually make much stuff. But actually when I was just kind of making more and being less scared of it, I guess, that then things were actually going somewhere. But then I applied again to masters and I got in. Yay! So then I went to City and Guilds, so 2 years ago, and that was really an opportunity to think more about the ideas around my work and how I would progress that. And also it was an opportunity to work with glass for the first time, and it's a medium that I've been fascinated with for many years, but because it's so expensive and difficult to access, it was my first opportunity to do that. So then I started working with kiln formed glass, so maybe not a process that I really knew existed that much longer before I started at City and Guilds, because you always think of blown glass That's, the big fancy exciting thing. But yeah, with the kiln form glass, I was working a lot with pâte de verre. So that's a very, very old technique that originated in France, and it's working with crushed glass, traditionally mixed into like a powder, and you put it in a mold, and you can get this amazing sort of gradation of colour. You're effectively painting with coloured glass powder, but I was using it in kind of a different, more experimental way, and I guess because I have no training in glass, like I'm coming at it from a very different angle. It also was an opportunity to think more deeply about the themes within my work. So in the years preceding that, I was becoming more and more interested in the effect of digital technology on our bodily materiality and how we perceive our bodies. But I was looking at it sort of more closely in like a sort of a feminist lens, thinking about the representation of women in the digital sphere, thinking about this idea of digital dysmorphia, how all of these apps where we can change what our faces look like, how that changes how we feel about our real faces. But then in my time before going to City and Guilds, I was living out of Wysing Arts Centre. So that's in the countryside near Cambridge. And that experience of living in the countryside was a very profound experience for me, because I'd grown up in a city, and kind of reconnecting to nature, and I guess also reconnecting to my body in a way. And there was also the pandemic, obviously, at that time. So it was like a very isolating experience, because already I was in the middle of nowhere. I was becoming more and more interested, I think, in the non-human, and it was becoming less like a human-centered thing. And that developed more when I went to City and Guilds. One thing that's really core in my practice is material experimentation, and also kind of allowing the agency of materials to manifest in the work in different ways. So it's very much like a collaboration. There's the sort of textile sculptures that have glass inserts within them. There's the glass and metal sculptures, the reflattened airbrush paintings, and then the expanded photographic practice, which I'll be developing a bit more this year. With all of the glass work, always the glass comes first, but the way that I work with glass came out of a lot of experimentation. I was thinking about pâte de verre, really like seeing what this material can do, because it's also very relevant, like conceptually, thinking about how glass is this amorphous solid. So if you look at it in a microscope, the molecular arrangement is that of a liquid, but it's in a solid state. And this kind of in-between state is really fascinating to me, this idea of sort of fluidity or breaking of boundaries. It also has all these dichotomies, like it's strong, but also it can break easily. You can see through it, but you can't, it's still impermeable, like you can't pass through it. And it refracts light in all these interesting ways, and it has a really interesting connection with water, which has become more and more important to me. I think the way that I started working with it was really just sort of discovering what it could do, and I started thinking about how I could apply sort of digital imagery onto it with decals, but then I found that actually the glass itself was so fascinating. Like I accidentally discovered that if you fire a thin layer of frit, so that's crushed glass, like higher than you usually would, you can get this lace effect because of the surface tension within the glass, much like water would behave. All of the bits of glass are like finding each other and it's creating holes. That, because it's so fragile, had to be fused to a clear sheet of glass, and then I made these domes. Then I realised that actually I could combine these domes that I'd made, so they were dome glass and then mirror on the back, that they could be inserted into the airbrush fabric that I was doing before. So it was very much like through exploration that I came back to the stuff I was doing before I went to City and Guilds. Like it wasn't planned to be like that. And now that I've sort of developed that way of working, I can build upon that. And the kind of inspiration for, say, the shapes and stuff like that. Like one piece that was thinking about fungi and mushrooms. Another piece that was more kind of thinking about like what this kind of amorphous blobby shape that didn't really look like anything in particular could do. And then with the paintings, the airbrush paintings, Latent Space, that really came about through, well, actually partially through a paper task we had to do. We had to make these works on paper at City and Guilds, which is something that I hadn't done for ages. I was thinking, how on earth can I do this? And my friend showed me this artist who like crumpled up paper, airbrushed it, and then reflattened it. And I thought, wow, that's something really interesting, thinking about this interplay between dimensions, or like a memory or trace of something, and kind of going back to that sort of cyclical way I was working before, where I was always working between 3D and 2D and like translating things between the two. And then also when you take apart any of the sculptures, you have this basically map of what it was when it was 3D but flattened down to this 2D form. So I developed this way of making a 3D form, airbrushing it, and then reflattening it, and then the image comes from the 3D shape. They have aluminium welded metal frames, so the frames were made first, and that was very much a thinking like conceptually about wanting it to feel like almost like a specimen or a surgical tray. So that was very much like a material choice. And I'm really interested in that kind of idea of like what is the real and what is the digital and what is the physical in this space.